A loud drinker. All right. Welcome, everybody. It is 10:30 and we're going to get started. My name is Joran Oppelt, and I am the Director of Creativity and Innovation at Ridge, Royal Innovation Design Group. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to be here, facilitating and kind of moderating this panel discussion that we're having this morning called Free to Learn, an Unschooling Panel Discussion. So welcome everybody to the call. Really excited to be on with some friends of mine who are the panelists here this morning. Some people that I have known for years, some of you, and looking forward to some really great discussion. Really excited to see some people who are curious about unschooling or just want to learn more, get more connected with what's going on here, maybe even locally in Florida. And we hope to get to all of that today. But we've got a lot to cover. We've got a series of about 7 kind of core questions that I want to get through. So without further ado, I want to start. I'm going to be using Zoom primarily for the call. We're not going into any other software. So for those of you who are familiar with Zoom, that's fantastic. For those of you who aren't, you should know a few things. If you have a camera on your phone, I want you to turn that camera on. I know for some of you it's early. I know for some of you it's messy. Whatever you haven't got your face on, it's okay. I want us all to feel kind of connected and start to build a little empathy here in the room with one another. So please, if you're able, go ahead and turn your cameras on. And it also allows me as a facilitator to kind of read the energy in the room. Are you leaning forward? Are you leaning back? Kind of as we move through the conversation. The other thing is that you should have your microphones muted. So if there's any background noise happening, it's not distracting to everybody. And Marie's going to help me keep the microphones muted. And that includes the panelists, just to keep the background noise in control. Third thing to know in Zoom is that you have an option of gallery or speaker view. Up in the top right corner, you'll see a button that says either gallery view or speaker view. That allows you to see the person who's speaking front and center, or stack it up in like the Brady Bunch style tiles. I encourage you to use gallery view, just to look at all of the faces. Since we're a chorus of voices this morning, let's see all the faces that are here in the room with one another. And the other thing is the chat. If you haven't already, there's a button at the bottom of your Zoom window if you're on a desktop that says chat. Go ahead and press that button and have that chat window open on the side of your screen, or if you've got it popped out, it'll float around on top. But have the chat window open. That will allow us to have some side conversation. It'll also allow you to plug in some questions as we move through. 2 things about that. If you have a question at any time, I want you to put it in the chat using the chat tag question. So your question would be question : and then whatever your question is. That'll allow us to kind of visually scroll through the conversation and see what those questions are when we get to the Q&A at the end. But what I want you to do is test the chat right now. Go ahead and type in the chat, where are you, where you are. You can be as specific as you want. Planet Earth, my living room, my kitchen, whatever, but what city are you in? Where are you located? So we can get a sense of where everybody is today. I see St. Pete, I see Pennsylvania, fantastic. Some more St. Pete, Florida, Gulfport, Arkansas, lots of St. Pete love, that's great, fantastic. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to paste in the chat the OARRs. What the OARRs are is the way I run every meeting. It's the objective, agenda, rules, and roles. It's how we know what we're here to do and what we're going to do in order to get to that objective. What ground rules are we going to follow? And then who's in the room, right? So I'm going to paste in the OARRs right now, and you can see those there in the chat window. Our objective today is to hear from a panel of experienced voices on the topic of unschooling. That's the goal. We're not here to proselytize or preach or convert anybody to a philosophy that I know personally as an unschooling dad This thing looks different for every family. So it's not like we're trying to like impose a framework or, there'll be education and learning happening, but it's not about one way of thinking, one system of thought. You'll have a better sense of that, I think, by the end of the call. Our agenda is as follows. There's the welcome and the OARRs. I'm going to introduce the panelists. We're going to go through these series of questions, and we're going to leave time for Q&A at the end of the call. Here are the rules. The rules are pretty easy. The first one is focus. And I know that I said to put those questions in the chat. There's some side conversation in the chat. That's okay. Allow yourself to still be focused on the conversation that's happening in the room. Okay, don't get too tangled up in side conversations, though I want to encourage you guys to ask questions as they come up in the chat and be able to respond to one another there. Feel free to do that. Focus also means that you have other browser tabs closed and you've got the door closed and you're in an environment where you can focus on the meeting or on the session, on the conversation that's happening. So please go ahead and do that. The second rule I want to invoke for everyone, including our panelists, is that we are speaking for ourselves. We are not saying the words we or they, especially because it's about a topic like unschooling, similar to politics or religion. This is a very personal thing, and we're all applying it differently. So I encourage everyone to use the words I when you're speaking about things. I noticed, I believe, I practice, I imagine, right? Using that I language when we're having this conversation. And the third one is be curious. Just if you get stuck in a situation where you're like, oh, I don't agree with this, I'm feeling uncomfortable, there's resistance rising up in me, there's tension, contraction, something happening, find a place of curiosity. What is the question that you need to ask? And it most times needs to be just kind of a larger question, right? It might even be kind of some personal inquiry, like, why am I resistant to this? Or what do I have to learn in this moment? How might I apply this thing that I'm hearing about, right? What is the larger question from a place of play or curiosity that you can get into as we're having these conversations? Those are the rules, the ground rules for today. And then finally, the roles. This is who's in the room. This is who's here to have this conversation today. I've got these bios for the panelists, and I'm going to read them in alphabetical order. Here are the panelists we have today. Monica Clark Robinson. She's a professional actor and children's book author. She's raised 2 daughters who were collectively unschooled for a total of 12 years. Monica lives in a yurt in the wilds of Arkansas with her daughters, 7 chickens, 2 dogs, far too many cats, and just the right amount of husbands. And she's also got a piano there behind her. Everybody wave and say hello to Monica. Thanks, Monica, for being with us today. We also have Marie Goodwin. Marie is a writer, activist, and recovering academic who is deschooling herself while unschooling her 2 teens in Media, Pennsylvania. She wears many hats: event planner, archaeologist, student of herbalism, and writer. She's currently birthing her first novel of historical fiction and plotting her next adventure once travel is again possible. Marie, wave to everybody, and everybody wave to Marie. Thanks for being here this morning. Next up, we have Trish Laszlo. Trish is an unschooling mom to 4 never schooled kids, ages 8, 11, 15, and 17. She is a former high school English teacher, and she quit her job and escaped anything resembling formal schooling when her first child approached school age. Trish is obsessed with crochet, which I can vouch for, and her kids roll their eyes when she tries to get them to watch YouTube videos about yarn. Trish, wave to us, and everybody say hello to Trish. Thanks for being here. And then lastly, we've got Kevin Sabrin. Kevin is a husband, a father of 4 unschooled kids, aged 21, 17, 14, and 11. And he is the current co-owner of the Rethinking Everything Conference. That was founded in 1996. RE is one of the oldest conferences in the country. Unschooling conferences, has been host to thousands of speakers and attendees. Kevin is the one who looks like he's carrying a canoe over his head. Kevin, wave to us. There he is. And everybody say hello to Kevin. The rest of you, everyone else who's on the call, you guys you're here to listen and learn and search and seek, and I'm sure you guys have all kinds of motives for being here. And hopefully we'll unpack that a little more through the Q&A at the end of the call. And again, just want to express appreciation for everyone for showing up today. Just doing a little time check here, and we're doing great on time. What I want to do is kick this off, give the panelists an opportunity to share kind of right off the bat, just a couple minutes each about kind of what their unschooling journey has been. But before we do that, I just want to remind again, we're not here to kind of debate the merits of unschooling, and I also don't want this call to be about the easily findable stuff that you can find on Google or Wikipedia. Like, what are the differences between unschooling and virtual school, homeschooling, right? Is it legal? Can I stop once I start it? Yes, the answer is yes to all that, right? So I want to really hear the stories from people today and about how it's being applied differently in these situations and where we've seen some successes and some real breakthroughs. I am going to start, I guess we'll just start in that order. We'll start with Monica. I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock, and I want you to answer the question, what made you decide to unschool, right? What was the tipping point where you went from like, oh, here's this idea to, oh, that's a thing our family could really do, right? So yeah, go ahead, you've got 2 minutes.
Wise to put a timer on me. That's very smart. When my first daughter was she went to kindergarten, then she went to first grade. And in the middle of first grade, we were like, wait a minute, what happened to that kid who was curious and who loved learning and who was always getting into things and finding out about things? Like, what happened? School was supposed to make that better, right? And it didn't for her. And so we said, all right, starting in second grade, that's it. We are homeschooling. And I had never heard of unschooling. So I brought her home, and I was also having my second child at that time, and I was pregnant, and we started the like classical unit studies, homeschooling kind of stuff, and did that for maybe a couple of months. And it was so much work. And the question my daughter Maddie had all the time was, when can we be done so we can go on to the next thing? When can I go on to what I want to do? And I started noticing that the things she wanted to do were super, super worthy, and that she was mostly forgetting the things that we were doing in the unit studies. And then one day I was at the public library, and I picked up the John Holt book. I think it was How Children Learn was what I picked up, and read that book, and it blew my mind. And at that point I said, I'm going to look into this. And then I casually became obsessed with all things unschooling on the internet, and read family blogs and everything. And then we started doing that, and then we just lived, and we lived richly. And I had time to do my living richly while she was doing hers, and we were learning together, just living. So that was our path.
Thank you, Monica. Let's go next to Marie. I'm gonna put 2 minutes on the clock for you.
I had to unmute myself there. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for coming. What made me unschool? It was a real process. When I gave birth to my oldest, who's now 18, and just graduated, like left institutionalized education, like at the matriculation requirements. I can remember in the hospital looking at his face and saying, how can I ever put this person in school? Now, this comes from two adults who I was 36 and 39 when I had my children. So I'm a little older parent, and both my husband and I had, through our adulthood, really learned that our school experiences, while completely different, were both detrimental to be growing and learning. I had learned to unconsciously accept power and authority as right, and my husband had rebelled and really struggled because of it. And both of us saw those as wounds that we did not want to inflict on our children. So when he was born, I started the investigation. And then when my daughter was born, and I really began to get serious about the fact that this was coming up, the research began. And I realized that in the state of Pennsylvania, I had until 8 for them to matriculate, which the state doesn't require any, you don't have to be registered. And that basically led us down a path of just living our lives. So that's us.
Thanks, Marie. Trish, let's go next to you. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. So how did I start unschooling? I am a former teacher, so I sort of come from a background of being in school. And the reason I was a teacher was mostly because I wanted to spend time with kids, that I enjoyed being with children. And then I had my own kids, and when my oldest child first was approaching kindergarten age, and I had this vision of the school bus coming and sort of taking him away from me, I just suddenly, something in my gut to me, I don't want to interrupt this great family life we have and put a kid on a school bus and sort of send him off all day long. And then really quickly, I actually met a group locally that was an unschooling group. And so within about a month's time, I met a whole bunch of unschoolers, and I got to see that it was possible to educate your kids in a way that didn't require anything that resembled formal education at all. And it was just mind-blowing to me. So after that, I couldn't go back to the concept of schooling. That's pretty much it.
Thanks, Trish. And Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Joran. So my wife Kelly and I have been together a couple of decades, and our relationship started out questioning natural versus normal, from writing our vows to how and when we got married and what the expectations were in marriage, to children, and then vaccinations, and along the story comes home births and midwives and bathtubs and circumcisions and every other decision that sort of entered the scene. So when the education question hit the radar, around 2 or 3, or whenever you really start thinking about the logistics, I guess we looked at that and we applied what we'd call our sort of natural lens as opposed to normal. We have zero interest in what normal is in society. The conventional wisdom and cultural norms, I think, are largely crap. And, not that we're against other people's decisions, but they just didn't necessarily work for us. So when we were trying to apply what natural meant, how would we, how do we want to create this environment for this child, and what do we actually want? And we started to do some research, and we came across unschooling very early on. There were some conferences involved. We ended up going to the one that we now own way back before we didn't. And we were starting to try to figure that out. What would that look like? We just assumed there was some kind of a curriculum involved. If we didn't go to school, that we assumed there would be some kind of a curriculum at home. And it was even after more learning and more talking to people that we realized that there's all sorts of options available. And it really just starts with, do the same thing you did today, do the same thing you did yesterday, today. Just wake up and be and do and listen and learn and inquire and take it from there. It's really a step and a breath at a time. It wasn't some big, all right, today, this is the edict. We're now officially doing this, and we're doing it forever and always. And because it's been kind of a work in progress. And a lesson in learning, both for the young ones and for us along the way. That's how it started, is really just questioning what we're going to do with the firstborn.
Thanks, Kevin. Awesome. I want to get on to the first question, and we had compiled these questions into what started to emerge were categories. And that first one, what is it? What's the theory behind it? How did we get there? Will it make my kids weird? All of that stuff is kind of in that. You just gotta kind of listen to the stories of people doing it and see how it's applied. The second one, the questions fell into this category of daily life. It was like, what does it look like from the beginning of the day to the end of the day? Like paint done for me, right? Like walk me through it. And one of the was like, I think this was Marie, like we fight all the time as it is. What's going to happen if we start to unschool, right? So I'm going to start this one. This time we're going to have 5 minutes on the clock. Encourage our panelists to be within or short of that. So there's also time for others to respond if they want to. But I'm going to start this one with Trish. I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock. We're going to start with Trish. Just what does a typical day look like for your unschooling family? Go ahead.
So for our family, we're kind of homebodies. My husband works from home, so often during the week, my husband's sort of up in the bedroom in his office, just kind of doing some work, but then we see him every so often walking through the house whenever he's taking breaks. I'm puttering about, just kind of doing my thing, crocheting obsessively. My kids have all different activities that they just want to do. Like my youngest is doing Legos sometimes, and then other times he's on YouTube videos. My second oldest child, who's 11 now, she is the arts and crafts girl, and so she might have like all these different crafts projects set up on the table. We no longer have a dining room table, essentially, because I sort of believe that once you start like homeschooling, the projects start like just multiplying everywhere. And the thing about projects is that they don't always have like a very like clear beginning and end. And sometimes they go on for weeks, at least in my house. So we actually set up tables all over my house. We have the dining room table. We have a card table that I sometimes use for puzzles. We have another folding table that is used for displaying Legos and working on Legos. Sometimes one of them is a game table. So we kind of don't sit at our dining room table anymore, which is fine because we're all just doing all sorts of exciting stuff all the time. So right now during COVID, we're home most of the time, but then that of course changes when it's not, COVID-19 time. So, I feel like it's kind of, I have to like clarify what is unschooling during this time, the pandemic, and what is unschooling for us during not a pandemic. Our week is broken up when it's not a pandemic by all sorts of other things. Like there's park day, there's a day where we go to co-op. So we are members of a homeschooling co-op that has all different types of homeschoolers that attend. And my kids are free to choose to take classes if they want to at the co-op. And we also get to socialize there. So we meet lots of like friends. I get to socialize with other unschooling parents and also homeschooling parents. So I'm making friends. My kids are making friends. And then, there's just regular life, grocery shopping, errands, stuff like that. And sometimes my kids come along with me for those things, and sometimes they don't. We're not a family that follows to a strict schedule anytime, really, except for co-op. We always show up at co-op 1 day a week, but we're really relaxed about it. And I know that's not true of all unschoolers. Some people like schedules more, but we don't. We like to just go with the flow wherever life takes us, and it's good with us.
Thanks,
think
Trish.
that's it.
We got about a minute and a half left. Any of the other panelists, just a few words, like highlights. What does that day look like for you guys?
For us, it just looks like, because there are three of us at home now, because my oldest daughter lives on her own, it just looks like three people with their individual projects swirling around each other, supporting each other sometimes, helping each other sometimes, but mostly we are very independent. For my daughter, of course, she comes to us for support, for mentorship, for ideas to run something by us, but it's very much three humans curious and learning around each other, sort of satellites around each other.
Great. Kevin or Marie, about 30 seconds left. What do you guys have? Kevin, you're muted.
Because we live close to Trish, we end up seeing their family at a lot of events, and both of those stories sound very similar to what our world looks like. I'd only say that in addition to that, that's what it looks like today, but what it looked like when we lived in an RV for 7 years because we had the freedom to do it. There was a lot of picking up sticks and making campfires and going on hikes. When we lived in Peru, we ran a bed and breakfast. We were in Costa Rica, we learned how to navigate the waters of the canals and stuff like that. That's not like, it was the freedom while learning that really added layers to, that's what our day-to-day looked like then.
Thank you. And Jen in the chat, before we get to the next question, Jen in the chat privately to me asked if I was going to tell our unschooling story from the beginning when the panelists shared, because ours is a little different. We switched later. We had one child in school and took them out of school, and of course had to go through the questioning of, of course, me with my kind of stoic, masculine, whatever that is, rigidity around, well, I don't know about that. That sounds weird, and Jen doing kind of the research into the community and having connected with people who are already doing it, said, well, no, but look at this, but read this and look at this. And it was a little bit of a bringing up to speed and onboarding on my part. But as soon as I found the courage to kind of unplug and kind of, I think, for me, come to terms with the fact that I was encouraging people to unplug from these other institutions in life, whether they were religion or politics or, you name it. Education just became another one of those institutions, and it kind of played itself out to a logical conclusion for me. And I was like, yeah, why wouldn't we try this? And again, like I said in the beginning, we can always go back if we don't feel it's working. And it's been working for us. And now our youngest is, I think he was in pre-K, but he's never been in that system either. I want to move on to the next question. The next question is, let's see, the category of, socialization and norms. We had a lot of people asking, are your kids isolated? How do you get the socialization in their lives? Does unschooling doom them to a life of crime or being a couch potato or playing video games all day? And what do I do if they want to just play video games and watch YouTube all day? What then? Right? What do I do if they don't do what I think normal is? What then? Right? How are they going to be well-rounded? So this idea of, are they isolated? How do they get socialized? What is normal? Let's see. Trish, let's start you off again with that. Just a few words about that. I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock again.
Well, the idea of socialization is interesting for me just because I'm an introvert. So for me, I probably would rather stay inside and maybe away from people more than your average person. So a little bit as an unschooling parent, I do have to, I think, push myself a little bit to reach outside the home. And, like for instance, I mentioned the homeschooling co-op. So I'd love to hide in the corner at the homeschooling co-op that we attend, but I kind of push myself not to, for the sake of my kids, basically. And, just to talk to other parents and get my kids talking to other people.
Yeah. Marie, what about you? What's your take on this normal thing? socializing?
Well, I too am an introvert, but I am the mother of a very extroverted son. Um, and my daughter, who is 14, so they're 18 and 14, my daughter is, she's becoming more introverted, but she also has a need for friends. And so I too joined homeschooling co-ops and did, we have friends in our town. They see all the time. My kids have had friends since they were babies with the same people. And they see all their friends, especially after the schools let out, because a lot of their friends do go to school. But my kids have always found their way socially. They've always had, been able to reach out and make friends with people and go to people's houses, and that's never been an issue. My son has been involved in theater since he was 6, and that has provided a big social outlet for my son all year, and it still goes on today. And he's applying to college this year to do Shakespearean studies and professional acting. And so the theater has always been this really big outlet for him. My daughter's an artist and prefers to spend hours drawing on her own, and then to socialize when it's good for her. So yeah, socialization has never been a problem, and it kind of makes me laugh. I mean, my kids are 2 of the most social people you'll ever meet, and it really, whether they go to school or not, does not make them introverted or extroverted or asocial or uber social. That's personality. That's not how they're learning. So.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we do more now. There we go. I think we do more now as far as camps or classes or sleepovers or play dates or whatever than we did before, than we did when they were in school. Because they were so exhausted at the end of the day, they didn't want to do anything. They were just done. They were checked out. And then anything after that felt like we were forcing them to get up and go to this class or camp or whatever it was. And now they want to do it because it's integral to their life and their learning process. Let's see, Kevin or Monica, anything to add about socialization or norms?
I would just echo what Marie said about the theater. For us, it's really been about, socialization has been about whatever the kid, the individual child is drawn to. Make sure they have avenues for that in their world. So theater became a social outlet. We were a theater family, so that was sort of a natural. We got my eldest daughter an art mentor, and she would meet with that person all the time. And then there was like a co-op. My daughter now, that's 13, is into volleyball. Of course, now everybody's a little isolated, but there's still all sorts of online stuff that's happening. And then also, you can kind of hole up and pod with one family, 1 or 2 families, and, be safe together in your little pod. And that creates a lot of socialization for kids.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that socialization isn't a problem in our family. We probably, in the spectrum of introversion and extroversion, we probably skew a little on the extroverted side, although we have some homebodies who really prefer their quiet time and need to manage that more carefully than the rest of us. I think the takeaway that's most important for me is what I'd call self-isolation. And it's where the kids have learned how to manage stimulation and their interaction levels with people, because we're here to curate for them. So we make these things available, whether it's co-op or music classes or what have you. They're out there doing it. They're doing it a lot, and and it's exciting for them, and they really they kind of drive the calendar. But they've all had to learn at one time or another how to manage that downtime and bring themselves down to a more balanced place. Today, they happen to be watching a Martin Luther King YouTube video because of the focus on Black Lives Matter movements and so forth, and trying to figure out what peaceful communication looks like. Yesterday, they could have been watching Grey's Anatomy or shooting zombies on a computer game. I don't really know, but managing their activity level and learning how to self-isolate is probably the takeaway.
Awesome. Thank you. I also want to remind everybody, if you have questions that are coming up for you at this point, please put them in the chat. Tag them with the word question in front of them so we can scoop them all up at the end for the Q&A and address them. But please be putting in the chat any kind of responses or questions that you're having to the conversation at this point. The next question, this is a good one. And actually, Kevin and I had a conversation yesterday in preparation for the call, and I feel like we spent an hour just talking about this question. Probably because we're dudes and probably because we're dads, but it's like, this is the big one, right? It's the question about like, what is our responsibility in the process? Who is in control at any given time? Are we relinquishing control and giving up will or agency over to someone else or to our children, right? And how do we establish boundaries within that? So it's kind of the parenting question and the who is in control question, the personal responsibility question. And Kevin, I'd like you to start it off.
Yeah, so that was a good conversation, and I was probably an hour. And if we're dudes and dads, I guess that makes us dads. So I just wanted you to know that you might not want to use those two together. So who's in control? So, I mean, ultimately, I guess where Kelly and I come from is, you know, our belief is that we're all ultimately only in control of ourselves. Doesn't mean we're not responsible for, especially the littles. I mean, we've got to take care of them. We've got to get them up and nurture them and on their feet. But I think, like, from a place of, at the earliest possible place, encourage that empowerment, you know, so that they're not, you know, we're not derelict in our responsibility as parents, but from the earliest possible place, encourage that empowerment. Anything short of, like, anything earlier than being able to physically take care of yourself probably enters some space of, like, spiritual belief and things like that. But let's say from the earliest possible place, like, let them do it. And I've always used this metaphor. We were watching the Olympics years ago, Winter Olympics, and there was this curling. You guys know curling, where you take that puck and send it down the ice. And it was around the same time we were exploring unschooling. And I had this really strong visual that the person, like, we're the people with the brooms, like, sweeping that little pathway to try to help them land that puck. But the launch of the puck, the movement of the puck, the finesse, the power, everything about it, including the focus and the goal in the first place, was them landing that puck on that spot. And as a parent, you know, we were simply there to kind of help finesse and massage it. So we see ourselves at times kind of equal parts, like curator and protector and things like that. But we've tried to eliminate this idea of power over, which is a whole separate conversation, why we barely could do it with an hour yesterday. But we come from a place, if there is a spectrum, we are on we're not on the power over side of the spectrum. We're on the partnering side of the spectrum, which again takes us down a whole different path here. We wanted to keep it at a high level about unschooling. But from that, you'll understand my comments that at the earliest possible place, we're turning the responsibilities over to the kiddos. That doesn't mean that we're not boundaried, right? Like, developing boundaries is a super important part of it, because you'll see quickly that a lot of the strain and struggle within families is this establishing of boundaries and freedoms at the same time. So super important that, you know, the kiddos establish what they're curious about early on, and they start to identify those passions. I mean, that's really why we're doing it anyway. And to give them the ability to chase after those things at the earliest possible age and curate it, I think, is probably what's most important for me. So am I in control? No. Am I an active participant? Absolutely. Am I responsible for? Absolutely. But I'm trying to give them the widest possible berth I can. I think the keys there are say yes as often as possible. Under what conditions would I say yes, or could I say yes and still be within my own boundaries? And we like to incorporate the word let's a lot, like let's do this or let's do that, as opposed to, you know, go do your homework or chores or whatever that is. So that's kind of like the trilogy of cooperation for us.
Monica, Marie, or Trish, anything to add about the control, boundary, responsibility?
Yeah, so I have a interesting experience with that, because my first time I went to the Rethinking Everything conference, I noticed that different families had different ways of being with boundaries, and I noticed that some parents had kids, little kids, up at 2 and 3 in the morning, and I was like, whoa, that's a different kind of unschooling than we do. That's that, you know, wow. And that's one of the things I want to bring up, is that a lot of these the ideas of boundaries and choice and all of those things, that unschooling families are all on a spectrum about that. I completely agree with what Kevin said, that it is not about power. It is about team. It is about that we as a parent have a responsibility to nurture, and that nurturing can sometimes look like boundaries. But beyond that, it's really just about being a team.
Marie, it looked like you had something to add. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I also think that you have to learn to hold the boundaries very lightly, because each person has different boundaries and they change over time. So, you know, what might be a boundary 2 years ago is a different boundary now. And I'm really seeing this accelerate during the teen years, where my 18-year-old is, you know, trying during the pandemic to become and to embody adult. He just turned 18. And so boundaries we may have had for him, we're letting go of. Boundaries for my 14-year-old, she feels differently about different things. And so we really have to learn and respect, and this requires communicating. So learning communication skills with your kids at every age is really important to establish the boundaries.
Thanks, Marie. The next question, I want to thank Amanda for putting a question in the chat. We'll get to that in the Q&A. I think we're doing good on time, so we'll have plenty of time to unpack those questions and address them. If anybody else has questions, please put them in the chat. The next question that I want to pose to the panelists is about work. So some of us work, some of us have to go to a job. And now a lot of us are working at home, but we still have to get to and from certain places. Some of us don't work at all, right? So the question of how do you make it work while working is a big one that we hear a lot. You know, oh, I could never do that. We work and we could never, right? We can never figure out how to do that. Or for whatever reason. So and it's also the kind of the question of, and one of our other friends, Nova, who is a single mother and, you know, doesn't have a lot of resources where she is, and just kind of is, you know, kind of a lower income situation. So the question around, like, how do you make it work when you're single or a struggling parent is also huge. I wish she were on the call. She couldn't join us this weekend, but that's a big one too. So Kevin, I know you've got a job that you've got to go to sometimes. Does anybody want to kind of start this one off? How do you make it work while working a job and juggling all of that stuff? Marie?
I can start off. So I am in a partnered relationship, although the homeschooling responsibility was largely mine. He would sometimes help as they were growing up, but he had a full-time job that was largely outside of the house for most of the week. I also had a full-time job that I worked from home, and I maneuvered that. I specifically sought out and took a job that allowed me to be home. And then I learned skills about how to sit with my kids while doing my work and answering questions should they have them. So I didn't have an office where I shut the door. My desk was in my living room for the vast majority of the time that I was unschooling, and I sat at the center of the chaos and learned skills about how to do work while sitting in that sort of chaos. But I had to maneuver it that way. This isn't something that just kind of like magically happened. You have to consciously choose this for your life. My husband, he goes to out of the home work. He went 3 days a week. The days that he was home, he could be more on point, and I could do things outside of the house, including sometimes traveling. My job, I went to Brazil, I went to Italy, I went to Scotland with my job, and I was able to patch it together with friends, family, my husband, my community, but these were all purposeful things, groundwork that I had to lay down. So it is possible to hold a full-time job and to unschool your kids I would say it would be much harder without a partner, but it is also possible because I know people who do it. I also know two people who work outside the home, both parents, and unschooled their kids for years. It just looked a little different. So I'll cede to Kevin
Thanks,
or
Mary.
anybody else.
Yeah. Kevin or anyone else? How do you make it work?
Yeah. Mile commute. Yes. Okay. Boy, great questions. So we're in a household where I'm primarily I'm the breadwinner. Kelly's staying at home with the kiddos. Always has. We entered into this by buying a bed and breakfast together, and it was this notion that we were going to have kind of a hobby business, and Kelly was going to kind of keep one foot in the work world. And right away, our attention fell on the kids and trying to balance it and keep it all straight. So really, ever since then, Joran and I, we talked about this at a men's group recently, that we kind of view ourselves as partners in this, where we're sort of back to back in a circle, and inside of this tight circle is Kelly looking inward and me right touching up against her back. I'm looking outward. And my goal is to try to not only earn for us, but kind of protect us or help our family manage the further away situation, things that are sort of either coming at us or things that need to be dealt with, like big picture, where Kelly's deep in the weeds and all the details and the emotions and the stories. And if we're back to back and we're kind of touching, then I can kind of talk over my shoulder to her about what's happening back there and vice versa. I'm still in it, but I have my focus and my view. And I think that analogy or that visual I'm trying to paint is the thing that kind of makes it work for us. This great question about, can parents, that are not in the same house, manage that? It's somehow establishing that level of communication or connection, maybe not as intimate, but at least an agreement around what we're actually trying to do together. So one person can look out while the other looks in. I wish I could speak to single parent homes, but I don't have any familiarity with it. I know hundreds of people who do, and I'd be happy to connect you.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about that. I think that the single parents that I know who do this manage it by being deep in a community and by relying very much on mentors and giving to that community as well as receiving from that community. I think that's one way. For my husband and I, we both work, well, I'm an actor, writer, voiceover artist, speechwriter person. So it is very much a full-time job, but I make my own hours. And then my husband is a full-time professor and also an actor. And so we have a lot of jobs, and the way we made it work is just tag teaming, and then also realizing that after a certain age, it's okay if for a while the child is really left to their own devices, because guess what? In the adult world, that's gonna happen sometimes. And so it's a super useful skill, but just to be a team, work together, and take over when the other person needs you to.
Yeah, thank you all. This next question is, let's see. So this is a big one, and it comes up a lot. And so some of the thoughts here are, how will the kids actually take some initiative to learn, right? Aren't you worried that your child will be behind, right? Either in grade or learning level, or that they're going to miss out on these important goals or skills, benchmarks, right? How do they stay on grade level, either the reading level or cognition level as an unschooler? What if my kid has trouble reading? What if my kid isn't caught up in math? All of these things. So the question of, what about reading and math and grades and measuring up is the question. I know, Marie, you've written about this. So do you want to start? Oh, one thing real quick. I know we didn't want to define what unschooling is, but I found this really great quote from an essay by Peter Gray, which is one of the guys we're going to send out as, we got a whole list of resources for people if you want to learn more about this. We've got books, movies, videos, DVDs, YouTube links, websites, local, national, you name it. This guy's books are on the list. His name's Peter Gray. And I just want to read this quote before I hand this over to Marie, because I think it directly informs it. Peter Gray writes, "Unschooling is not schooling. Unschooling parents do not send their children to school, and they do not do at home the kinds of things that are done at school. More specifically, they do not establish a curriculum for their children. They do not require their children to do particular assignments for the purpose of education, and do not test their children to measure progress. Instead, they allow their children freedom to pursue their own interests and to learn in their own ways what they need to know to follow those interests. They may, in various ways, provide an environmental context and environmental support for the child's learning. In general, unschoolers see life and learning as one thing. Marie, why don't you take it from there?
Okay, so there's a thing that parents often engage in when they begin this process, which is deschooling themselves, right? And so we have you know, collectively, those of us who went to school, I know that I specifically, and my husband specifically, had baggage from school, things that we assumed were going to be the case for learning that just don't apply. And it took some years of figuring that out. And your kids end up being kind of your experiment, your mirror that shows you the things that you're taking for granted. And so I have, you know, I'm 3 chapters shy of a PhD. I didn't finish, I'm ABD. So I have a lot of schooling baggage to unpack. And I brought all of that to bear in my relationships with my children. My firstborn read easily and taught himself to read at 6. And so I thought, well, that's just grand. Look at unschooling working. This is awesome, right? And then my daughter showed not only a disinterest in listening to books, or when she was read to, she would fall asleep or walk away. She refused to learn her alphabet. She refused like to sing the songs. She basically told me, okay, this totally shows my kid and the family she was raised in. She said, Mom, she told me when she was like 6 or 7, young, she's like, Mom, learning to read is the colonization of childhood. She's like, why? When people learn to read, they change, and I'm not ready to give up my childhood, so I'm not going to learn to read. Well, okay. So I step back, and you sit and you worry, like, she turns 8, she's not reading, doesn't know her alphabet. I'm like, okay, I'm now officially worried she isn't doing it like I expect, and like my firstborn did it, right? So the 2 comparisons I have in my brain. And so I reach out to friends who are reading specialists. They're like, leave her alone. She'll learn when she wants to learn, and it's no big deal. 9 comes around, not interested. 10 comes around, still not reading. And I'm inside filled with turmoil. You're failing, you're failing, you're failing. And she came home one day and she said to me, Mom, my friends are making fun of me because I can't read, and they all read at school, and I'm not doing the same things that they are, and I'm a loser. And it just broke my heart. So we sat down and I said, Hun, do you want to read? And she's like, I want to read. And I'm like, okay, so let's dig in. So it turns out we had had her eyes checked, but we had not had her reading checked. And her eyes, she needed glasses, but that wasn't the problem. The main problem, we had a reading specialist come in, and she is dyslexic. And she's not just a little dyslexic, she's very dyslexic. And so with her consent, we did a formalized program that tried to help her. And there were so many tears, and there was so much arguing, and there was so much self-esteem. You know, she just was crashing and burning self-esteem wise. And it was such a challenge. And it really pulled into focus that, you know, all my expectations had to be thrown out the windows. Okay, so she's 14 now. She reads just fine. She texts with her friends. Actually, texting with her friends was the key motivator to being able to read. And she's also this amazingly talented artist, and she does other things so well. She's a memory like an elephant, and she's an old soul, and when she was little, she could speak to animals and birds and trees, and she's magic. And so what you end up beginning, what, you know, as a parent is that there are going to be challenges, and you're going to have to meet them head on. But your kids will at some point decide for themselves that this thing is important, and that that motivation is what then brings in the learning, not you being on top of them saying, you're going to learn your alphabet today, you're going to learn to read now, we're going to work on sight words. That doesn't work. And all it does is cause self-esteem harm and sadness and arguing, and prioritizing the relationship with your kid and their learning style is more important than them being on time. So that's my experience.
Joran, do we have an extra 20 seconds for me to say something to that? Because I do have an interesting perspective on it.
Of course, go ahead. I'll put 20 seconds on the clock.
Great. I just wanted to say I had the perspective of my daughter, who as a visual artist wanted more art than we could give her, even with all of her mentors and so forth. And she wanted to go to the local arts magnet high school. And so she was unschooled for years and years. And then suddenly, oh my gosh, she's going to have to do algebra and all the things. And what we found out was that, were there some holes? Yes. But then there were other things that were vast advancements beyond. And so the thing is, it's not going to be normal, because normal was never what we tried to be, but she was deeply intelligent and she knew how to learn. And so her first semester of traditional high school, she made a 3.5. She made a B in algebra, and we'd never done any math. So they learn how to learn.
Thanks, Monica. The next question, actually, Monica, I wanted to kick this one off with you because you had written extensively about this or experienced this. This was, what about college, right? Like once they're out of the house and into the real world, can they go to college? Can they get a real job, right? What is that job going to be? Monica, let's start that with you and put 5 minutes on.
Yeah, so the neat thing about unschooling for me is that it creates people who are led by their passions, right? And it creates people who are still curious about the world, even after, you know, the normal schooling years. And so I have seen not only my daughter, but lots of other kids that she was unschooled with that are her age, either go to college or a trade school or enter into some sort of life program at that college age that they are really led by their passions. And I don't know if you've ever gone to college not actually being interested in going to college, but it doesn't usually work well. And so the cool thing is that when a kid reaches that done with high school age, typically if they've been unschooling, what I've seen is that they know what they want to do more. It's not always going to look like what everyone else's looks like. But they're going to be more driven, and they're going to be very curious. And my daughter she's done incredibly well in college. She's in her senior year now, and she does it because she's got a specific thing she wants and needs to learn in college. I do think we should start, maybe as a culture and as a society, not holding up college as this thing that every educated person must do. I don't think it is, but I think that the cool thing is that unschooled kids tend to know if it's what they need to do or not. So that's what I've noticed anyway.
Yeah. Thanks, Monica. Yeah, Marie, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that our experience is very similar to Monica's. And my daughter is also doing the Arts Magnet High School next year as well. But my son, he started college at the community college when he was 15, and now has enough credits that he will enter when he goes to a 4-year school. He'll enter as a junior, saving us $60,000 or, you know, and this is made possible by the fact that he wasn't going to high school. He entered into that knowing he wanted to study Shakespeare, knowing that that was his end goal, and was going to college, and was able to do this thing that has really benefited him. So that's also another motivation for it.
Kevin or Trish, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd add that, so we, you know, of our 4 kids, we've taken one kiddo to school one time, and I think it was our 17-year-old went to like a 3-school kind of a thing and lasted sort of a half a day, and that was a socializing experiment. We ended up moving from the small town that didn't provide us what we needed to find a larger resource, and that's how we ended up in Florida. Side note. But we currently, our oldest is in college. He's in year 2 studying Mandarin Chinese. He's dabbled with, you know, computer programming and some other things, and it was really a passion-focused curriculum that he delved into that was brought on by early curiosity around foreign cultures and languages and people. So, you know, it's very doable. I think the main key there is like, know where you're going. Back to the very first thing we talked about, know where you're going, let them help develop their passions, figure out where it is they want to go organically. And then that roadmap will present itself and they'll get whatever they need. Like, you know, he said, oh crap, I've got to go get my GED, or I've got to go take the SATs or whatever. And guess what? There was a cram course of studying that filled in all the nooks and crannies that was missing maybe previously. And I've got one kid that took on math early, another one that took on reading, and that one read Harry Potter out of the gate. Like, that's how we really learned to read. It was really fascinating. So it can all happen. It's just like, you got to look at where the destination is and then figure out what steps you're going to have to take to get there. And if I'm going to be a brain surgeon, there's going to be a whole lot more protocol than, you know, if I'm going to be an artist, right? So understanding what the needs are of that space is probably one of the most important things.
Great. Trish, anything to add?
Just one quickie. You know, my oldest is 17 right now, and I think that they're just not ready for college yet. And for our family, I don't like the idea that college is something that you do when you turn like 18. That's just not going to happen necessarily for us. And it's fine if it takes a few years more, or maybe they'll never go to college, or maybe they will. So I'm just kind of waiting for that to happen, and I'm pretty relaxed about it.
Good. Thank you. Wanted to, okay, so the question on this list is just about resources. Like, what are the resources out there? I think we've heard the word community mentioned a few times, right? It's important to plug into and lean on that community, not only locally, but regionally. And sometimes that's not family members, right? Sometimes that's other people, and you have to kind of reach out and do the work to establish those connections, weave that web for yourself before you can really reap the benefits of it. So the question, what resources are out there for unschoolers? It's a lot. And instead of going into all of that on the call, what we're going to do is send out everyone who's on the call and wants it. Here, I'm gonna paste something in here into the chat. A whole slew of resources. Like I said, we've got books and DVDs and links and articles and all kinds of things that are available. I'm going to put this in the chat. You just email me directly with the subject line unschooling, and we're going to send that out as a PDF out to everyone who's on the call, rather than go into some of those now. And we've already mentioned some of them. But what I want to do is get into the Q&A. Because we got a nice amount of time left to kind of unpack some of these questions. One of them that came up was from Amanda about, is this appropriate or a good idea for maybe a child who's on the spectrum? And what that brought to mind for, I think for a lot of the families I see, ourselves included, like there's other kids who maybe have a learning disability and are, you know, just the schooling is not a right fit, or it feels hard. It feels like you're walking uphill, fighting a battle. Your kid may be LGBT, and you want to make a choice to have a supportive environment for them. And that would include either homeschooling or unschooling. So there's all kinds of reasons to do that, but I want to throw it out to the panel. Is this a good idea for a child who is maybe either learns differently or has learning disability or is on the spectrum or in any other way, shape, or form, just school isn't a good fit for them? Who wants to take that one on first?
I guess I can start. I do not have a child on the spectrum, but I have been friends with families who have a child on the spectrum who are doing unschooling. And my husband is also a speech pathologist professor, and so he has a lot of experience with this too. And my daughters have they both have ADHD. And so what you see in schools is that things like being on the autism spectrum or having ADHD or other learning issues, they are either medicated or looked at as a problem. And we call ADD or ADHD having attention that is, what is it, Greg? Dynamic and highly diverse. And that is very much how we support them through that, is that it's not a problem. It's the way they are beautifully wrought. And it in fact makes for a lot of energized learning and a lot of deep, intense focus sometimes, which is also a part of ADHD, when they are allowed to learn what it is they want to learn and do what it is they want to do. So I think that one of the best things about unschooling with children with various issues is that they are not problemized. They are allowed to learn in the way that they learn. And I think that's one of the biggest gifts of it.
Kevin, did I see you raise your hand as well? Did you have anything to add or no?
Yeah, there's so much to be said about this. I'll keep my comments brief, and so from the conference organizer's hat, I see tons of families enter the space because they have an instinct that their child is not going to thrive in a more regimented environment. So they enter a space that gives them some help or resources to curate something more appropriate at home. And I guess the 40,000 foot view, looking at all of that in aggregate, is like, I see opportunities for these kiddos to show up like superheroes in their home and navigate in something that was custom built for them, as opposed to having to fit into a funnel with a bunch of arbitrary nothingness and measurements and competition and other things. So the takeaway there, I know the next conversation we should probably have is, well, that stuff shows up in life anyway, and how do you prepare them for that? Life introduces that to them irregardless. It has no bearing on whether they experience bullying in school or bullying in the workplace. Like, giving them a solid foundation that suits them while they learn about these things that they're going to learn about anyway in some shape or form is you have to dispel the whole notion that it has to happen in school. For me, I had to get rid of the notion that it had to happen in school and that it had to happen on a certain timeline. And what better place than the home to curate some environment that'll foster better learning and better growing up as people.
Thanks, Kevin. Anything else from our panelists to add? And I want to encourage also the people who are on the call, please continue to put your questions in the chat, because we are now officially in the Q&A. So if you have questions for the panel, put them in the chat now. Maria or Trish, anything to add to that?
Just one thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Marie.
No, go ahead. It's fine.
I don't have a child that's on the spectrum, but I did want to mention that my experience just in our local homeschooling community and unschooling community is that I see lots of parents who have children on the spectrum that are unschooling or homeschooling. And I think it's been a positive experience to have those children be part of our homeschooling co-ops, and I haven't seen a lot of bullying of those children. I've seen a welcoming feel for all the different diversity we have in learning styles for all those children. And I'm not saying at all that unschoolers are perfect, because sometimes, fights occur, all sorts of things occur, just like any regular situation with kids might occur, but it's been really good. And there's definitely plenty of parents out there with kids on the spectrum that are unschooling.
Yeah. Marie?
I was just wanting to echo something that Kevin said about timelines. A lot of the deconditioning that the parents do, and you move in and out of your ability to be successful in this throughout, I think, the whole experience of doing this with your kids, is this need or this desire, this human quality of wanting to compare yourself with other people who are doing something similar, or other people who are doing the thing that is normal, right? By stepping, I mean, not so much now because of the pandemic, but by making this choice, you're choosing in some ways to step outside of timelines and normal, and deciding that your timeline and your normal is what's going to drive you. And you can't help but be human and sometimes compare yourself. But that intense comparison that sort of happens when the kids are young in so many ways, right? In other ways, like, are my kids growing the right amount? Are they talking on time? Like, you do that a lot when the kids are little, but one does it a lot when the kids are little. But that insistent voice kind of goes away as you begin to ease into this process with your people. And that the timelines, you begin to realize that the timelines are a forced normalization on something that, what is normal? What is we're not all the same. And as soon as you can make as much peace with that as possible, you begin to be one begins to be much happier with the process than if you're always comparing. So.
Thanks, Marie. Marie, do we have any other questions in the chat that we feel like we haven't addressed yet? I know we've been kind of collecting some and addressing some as we go, and there have been some people in the chat responding as we go, but are there some outstanding that we feel we need to get into?
While you're looking for other questions, I just wanted to add a little tiny thing to that, and that's that there will be fear. And I want to be very clear about that. If you go into unschooling, there will be fear early on, not so much from the kid, although that may come in too, especially when they compare themselves to others, but there will be fear in you, the parent. My daughters were born 7.5 years apart. And so I got to really see sort of the results of unschooling with my older daughter, so that now with this younger daughter, I am not feeling that fear as much because I went through that process. But man, in the early years, there was fear because most of us have been schooled, and we really have to retrain our brains to understand that humans learn. Humans learn in school, humans learn out of school. And that if we just trust the process, and even through days of nothing but Minecraft, or 6 months of nothing but Greek mythology and guitar, which literally was my daughter's first bit of unschooling, that trust that and let it be that. And I have seen it work with my kids, and I have seen it work with other kids. Feel the fear, but let it go and trust the process.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. I think that's connected to this idea of fear. I think is going to dovetail nicely into this question that Marley brought up, which was, what do you do if, not only if you're co-parenting, right? You have a child that kind of has to visit two parents or two houses, lives in two houses, and has to go back and forth. What might that look like? And also, what if that other spouse isn't on board with this, right? What if there's so much fear and resistance that you just can't get that other person on board? Anybody want to approach that question?
I'd like to start. I'll try to keep it brief on this, but that whether you're in the same home or outside of the same home, maybe if we start the conversation there, like getting on the same page takes some work, especially if one person is, like I referenced Kelly earlier, deeper in the weeds, probably more emotionally intelligent, certainly closer to the details. You know, she led a lot of this, and she was bringing me things to read and explore. while we were trying to figure out this path, because I had my view. I was, sort of like looking out, as I said, and she was looking in. So one of the things that I found very valuable was attending a group of guys get together. They called it a SUDS event. Society of Unschooled Dads had a big mystique to it. It was kind of fun, but it was really about, I'll just speak, I'm not genderizing this, but a bunch of guys who went to a conventional workspace and then came home to an alternative life space, and trying to reconcile those two things, where you're expected to live a life and play a game a certain way out in the, out in the work world, but yet you come home and it, it can seem like chaos or whatever, and just reconciling those two things and like developing reminders for yourself that this is why we're doing it. This is what we're encouraging. It doesn't matter that it doesn't look like what's on the other side of that door. We're doing this in what's in the best interest for them. And if you can do that in the household, which hopefully would be easier, then some of that same conversation about why is this important or what are we hoping as an outcome, that same conversation can go outside of the home in instances of families that live apart, or however that definition would hold. It's really about getting on the same page. So for me, I host a SUDS group with regularity, at least annually, and hopefully more than that. But in that case, it's given the guys an opportunity to reconcile that for themselves. I know Kelly was a part of some moms group. There's some good online resources, but helping to develop a language where it's not about us, it's about them, right? It's not about us as grown-ups. We had our shot. It's about them.
And I will add to that too. I mean, I'll just kind of put my numbers on the wall here, like email me personally if there's somebody who, a fellow dad who's like, I don't know about that, or, say, talk to Joran, talk to Kevin, like have a conversation with these guys about how it might work, what that might look like. I will talk to anybody and just kind of share what our journey's been like, because I have been just as fearful, if not more, and still am. Like Kevin said, you gotta deal with this stuff as it comes up. And yeah, I've got a monthly men's group that I lead, and it's the same thing Kevin's talking about. We're about I don't know, 75% of them are like 85% of them are dads, and I want to say 70% are unschooling dads. So we're always kind of checking in with each other and be like, is this cool? Are we still doing the right thing? Yeah, everything's good. So it's just that community support, again, especially as men. Marie, Monica, Trish, anything to add as far as like, how do you overcome that or make that connection with a partner or spouse who maybe isn't on board?
I have a really good friend who is a radical, she does radical education theory on the graduate level, and her spouse is not on board. He insists that the kids go to school. And so their family has had a hard time navigating, and her kids did go to school, but she talked to them every day about questioning the space, about knowing that helping them understand that they can learn as outside as well as in, and really facilitating the outside learning. She spent a lot of focus on that. And that's how they ended up navigating it. And her kids are, have left the matriculation of schools and have moved on in their lives. But sometimes it's a real dynamic that's very fraught in the family, and each family navigates that differently. But for my friend, instead of mandating that the kids stay home against her husband's wishes, she just undermined the whole idea of schooling in their minds, and that seemed to work.
Trish or Monica, anything to add?
Yeah, in my family, what we did, it's funny because it kind of mirrors the same way I convinced my husband to go vegan, or no, go vegetarian, because that was like 18 years ago. And it was that I had done the reading and the research myself, and I brought him sort of a little, I won't say a packet, but I was like, this chapter, read this chapter, and look at this study and read what this blog says. And now granted, we are often of the same mind, so this wasn't a hard sell at all, but I think that tactic of bringing the research and bringing what it is that you want, what it is that you saw and you read that convinced you, and show that to the other parent as well. And I think that that can be a big help. I won't say it will always work, but I think that can be a big help.
Trish, anything to add?
Yeah, just that my husband and I have to do a huge amount of talking, and I call it like our unschooling meetings. And it's where like we make an appointment to check in with each other about what's going on with the kids. And it's not like we don't always talk about all 4 of our children, but like if something's going on with 1 or 2 of them, we check in. And, you know, I know we talked about fear. Fear infiltrates from the outside culture into your brain, and it gets better over time. Like mostly I don't feel a lot of fear anymore, but every so often I do feel some fear, and I find myself reverting back to like a more traditional sort of mindset about education. And that's when I kind of rely on my spouse to remind me why we're doing this. And we kind of both do that for each other. So like we'll have little weak points where we have like some doubts about like, oh, is our second child ever gonna read? And then the other spouse can remind the one who's feeling the fear at that moment why we're doing this, and yes, it'll happen. And you have to do a lot of communication. If you're living apart, I imagine that communication will be more difficult, but it's doable, but you have to communicate.
Thanks, Trish. And with just about 4 minutes left before we wrap up, Tanya's brought up, she's sharpened the pencil on this question, specifically, what if they just want to play video games all day? What do I do, right? You know, I know what that looks like for us, so I can add to it if possible, but who wants to tackle that one first? I'm gonna put 4 minutes on the clock.
I could take it.
Mike,
My kids play a lot of video games, a whole lot. I do is when they're playing tons and tons of video games and I start to worry a little bit, I either play the video games with them, which is a lot of fun, and also I'm a terrible player and a lot of stuff, and then they laugh at me, and that's fine. Or I do my crocheting in the same room while they're playing video games, and I find we have really great conversations while that's going on. And usually what happens is I realize they're doing other stuff while they're playing video games. They're doing stuff from the video games, but they're also talking to people, working on some other stuff inside their head while what they look like they're doing is just doing this, but they're actually thinking about all sorts of things. So it usually just makes me feel better just to be present with them. And then you realize it's not just video games going on. It's like a lot more.
I also wanted to add, try to replace the idea of video games with books. So what if they just wanted to read all day? Would you have a problem with that? Because it's kind of the same in some ways. Yes, I understand that reading and watching videos, it's different and you learn differently. And I do understand all of that. But my father, who was a stern person about getting chores done, and we lived on a farm and there was always chores. Marie, why do you read all the time? You're always reading. And there was so much judgment around it. And so when I feel myself getting, and I do, and I sometimes it comes out and we fight about it as a family. My son in particular loves video games. I feel myself getting all angsty. It's like, he's been on video games all day. And then I go, well, what if he was reading all day? Would you be as angsty? And I try to bring myself down. I'm not perfect at it. But it's just something to consider about, maybe it's a judgment that you're bringing to the table rather than that they're doing something wrong.
I have a little bit of a different perspective on it because my first daughter didn't want to do any, I mean, she's a complete Luddite. I can barely get her to answer her emails now. So she didn't do anything on technology. But the second daughter did, and she did a lot. And the fear came up again, right? So what we did was we had a conversation where it was like, is this what you want? And are there other things you're not doing because you're doing this instead? And let's talk about that. Let's figure that out together. And we've done some variations of things like, okay, how about if as a family, we don't do gaming or YouTubing or any of those kinds of things in these hours of the day. And we set up these hours. And that helped us for a while sort of regulate ourselves and get involved in other things. And then after that regulation happened, we released it, and now there's no anything, there's no structure, but now she balances her time between technology and other things. So that was my perspective with it.
Thanks, Monica. Kevin, I think you answered it in the chat, but anything to add? You said it didn't look pretty. Talk to us about that.
Well, so deschooling, you can throw lots of topics in this, whether it's, food, or which is another huge hot button, right? Or anything like sleep patterns or teeth brushing or any of those kind of things. When you sort of surrender this notion of power over and you start incorporating more partnering or collaboration, this takes us down a partnership parenting path. But the idea is you're empowered to do it. Now, if they are unplugging from school and they're going to spend a whole boatload of time doing what they really love, they're going to do a lot of it first. And I think the major thing is like they're testing, I can speak for everybody all the time, but what appears to be happening a lot is they're testing the boundaries of this actual freedom to find out how much space, or is the shoe going to drop? Are you going to take it away or whatever? And then over time, and I don't know how long that's going to be for each individual kiddo, they settle into a rhythm. And that rhythm is like, my 14-year-old, who's a very active child, is a kid, grown man, is he's a big gamer, but he'll tell me, Dad, need an exercise break, or I need to get outdoors, I need to climb in the trees or whatever. He knows that about himself because he had that ability to navigate it for himself.
Thanks, Kevin. And I'll just tack on to the end that, yeah, it's been some, there's been a degree of conflict in our household around it as well. And, what we've decided was that we are experimenting with different exposure to it. We found a sweet spot with Ashton, our 8-year-old, where it's like 4 hours a day on Minecraft is good, and anything beyond that, there's some kind of cognitive shift when pulling him off the device. He just kind of turns into a jerk if it's any longer than that. So we found the zone, but that took lots of experimentation. Well, let's try 6 hours. Let's try 3 hours. Nope, he didn't like that. Let's try, you know what I mean? Like, we found the spot. So it's a constant conversation, and it's constant experimentation. It's including them in that process. We have literally 2 minutes left, and I just kind of want to take that time to again remind everybody, in the chat is my email if you want the list of resources that are all the books and videos and articles and podcasts and all the stuff that we've collected that we would love to share with you. Please email me, and we will send it right back to you. I want to take a minute to thank our panelists, Kevin and Marie and Monica and Trish, for being here and taking the time out of their morning to share with us and tell their story. I know there's still a lot of unanswered questions. This is the beginning of a conversation, so please reach out. For those of you who want to continue this conversation or learn more, please reach out to us personally, friend us on Facebook, whatever, but we'd be more than happy to plug you into whatever you need. And for those of us who know us personally, reach out and we'll just have coffee or whatever and continue that conversation if you need anything from us individually. Thank you all for coming and being here this morning. I know that this is a weird time and there's a lot of stress and contraction around what do I do next? Hopefully you felt some relief this morning around that question of like, well, what do I need to do if this is the next step? Hopefully you felt that a partial answer to that would be nothing, right? Nothing is really required of you as a next step if this is something you want to do. So again, please continue to reach out, have these conversations, have them with your partners. Oh, and Kevin, when's the conference coming up? This conference the National Unschooling Conference, when and where is it?
I should have had that ready. October, I'll post it. I forgot the exact dates now. It's been a minute. October something, late October, right before Halloween. right before Halloween.
But
here. I'll post it after. Sorry.
This year it's in
Yeah, we're moving it to St. Pete. Yeah, we're moving it to St. Pete this year. We're going to use the rec facilities over at the KOA campground in Madeira Beach. So we've got a nice little location, nature, packed with nature and opportunities for the kids to play and get together and talk about this and more. We take really deep dives at that place. Everything's on the table. So yeah, I would love to have it if you guys wanted to come out.
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to our panelists again. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and please reach out if you have any questions. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye, everybody.